there are two aspects of the working capital. That is, one is the gross working capital and one is the net working capital. What do we mean by adequate working capital? It should be just sufficient to meet the day-to-day expenses of the business. It is the work of the top level management to set the objectives for the entire organization, and based on these objectives, the middle level managers, they will be making their own strategies. The process for achieving your company's long-term goals include how you will execute your logistics strategy. Hello everyone, I am Purnima, faculty in the Department of Commerce and Management, Vidhyaashram First Grade College, Temple of Excellence, MYSURU. I welcome you all to this session. In this session, we will be having a discussion on what is working capital strategies. So there are two aspects of working capital. Now, before we look into the working capital strategy, we have to understand meaning of the word working capital. So we all know that the working capital is the difference between current assets and current liabilities. And also the working capital is the capital required to run the day-to-day affairs of the business. Now, let us understand what we mean by working capital strategies. There are two aspects of working capital, that is gross working capital and net working capital. So, the company's investment in current assets is called as gross working capital, and current assets includes cash, accounts receivable, short-term securities, bills receivable and inventory. Now, we have to understand here that there are two aspects of the working capital. That is, one is the gross working capital and one is the net working capital. Now, what do we mean by gross working capital? It is the investment of the company in the current assets of the company. Now, we all know that the current assets include cash, accounts receivable, short-term securities, bills receivable and inventory. So, they all form the current asset, and any investment we make in the current asset, that will comprise of the gross working capital. Then, the difference between current assets and current liabilities is called the net working capital. So, as I just explained earlier, the net working capital is the difference between current assets minus current liabilities. We have the net working capital. So, current liabilities include accounts payable, bills payable and outstanding expenses. Now, next is the company should maintain an adequate working capital to operate the daily and routine activities of the business. The shortage of working capital affects the creditworthiness of the companies and results in failure to pay even employees' salary. In contrast, excessive working capital results in idle funds and it in turn leads to high cost of capital. Now, the company should maintain an adequate working capital. Now, what do we mean by adequate working capital? It should be just sufficient to meet the day-to-day expenses of the business, to operate the daily and routine activities of the business, and the shortage of working capital affects the creditworthiness of the companies. Now, what will happen if there is a shortage of working capital? Then the company may not be able to meet the day-to-day expenses of the company. So, what are the day-to-day expenses? The recurring expenses. Now, what do we mean by recurring expenses? All those expenses which come monthly. If the company is not able to pay the rent, the power bill, the employee's salary and the installment, the interest on installment, etc., all these will affect the creditworthiness of the company. And as such, it should maintain substantial funds to meet all the recurring expenses of the company. And then, in contrast, if there is excessive working capital and idle funds, this leads to high cost of capital. So, if the working capital is more, then it may lead to idle funds, and which will in turn lead to high cost of capital. So, strategies relating to each aspect of working capital strategies are cash management, accounts receivable and inventory management. So, when we talk about working capital management, we have to think about the cash management, account receivable and the inventory management. Now, what do we mean by cash management? So, management of cash brings into sharp focus on the trade-off between risk and return. Cash management deals with cash flows into and out of the company, cash flows among different departments of the company, and cash balances held by the company to finance the deficits or to invest the surplus. So, the cash management deals with cash flows into and out of the company. So, what do we mean by cash management? So, we are dealing with the inflow of cash and outflow of cash. Then, inflow and outflow out of the company, the cash flows among different departments of the company. So, what is the cash flow from different departments? So, we know that there are various departments in the company, and what is the cash flow between the various departments, and also the cash balances held by the company to finance the deficits or to invest the surplus. So, to finance the deficits and invest the surplus, what is the cash balance available in the company? So, all this will comprise of cash management. So, continuous deficit of cash create risks and problems to the company, while continuous surplus of cash result in high cost of capital. So, if there is a deficit of funds, then it will affect the company's image. But if there is surplus of funds, then it will result in high cost of capital. The companies have to plan for optimum cash and maintain it in order to prevent the possible problems of deficit as well as surplus of cash. So, an optimum balance of cash is necessary. Now, how do we arrive at this? The optimum balance of cash. So, it should be maintained with the company. So, that is what we mean by cash management. Then, cash should be managed efficiently. The surplus or deficit of cash can be managed through float of cash represented by incoming collections, payment made sooner than necessary, scattered deposit balances, and excessive and unrewarding balances in checking the accounts. So, how do we manage the cash? The surplus or deficit of cash can be managed through float of cash represented by incoming cash collections. So, what is the cash collection made by the company? So, what are the incomes of the company? So, we have to take note of that. Then, payment made sooner than necessary. So, what are the payments made before the due date? So, that also we have to take into consideration. Scattered deposit balances. So, there are scattered. So, there will be many accounts in this. We have various deposit balances and excessive and unrewarding balances. So, all this will help in managing the cash. And this stage includes efficient management of near cash in order to produce the highest return consistent with the low risk. So, we have to see that in the efficient cash management, we have to produce the highest return with the lowest risk. So, the companies prefer cash budgets to control cash flows. Cash budgets serve the purpose only when the company accelerates its collection and postpones payments within allowed limits. So, whenever they will be preparing a cash budget to control the cash flows. So, cash budget will help when the company will accelerate. So, there is faster collections and slower payments. Only then we can manage the cash budget. Then, next one is the management of accounts receivable. The companies sell on credit due to a competition, bargaining power of the buyer or the market intermediaries, relationship and network with the market intermediaries, manufacturers, practices within the industry and requirements of the buyer. So, why is the company compelled to sell on credit? It is due to competition. So, there is always competition and bargaining power of the buyer or the market. So, bargaining power of the buyer and also the relationship and network with the market intermediaries. So, all this, they are forcing the company to sell on credit. The companies make optimum credit policy in order to maximize the operating profit profit and reduce the incremental cost. So the companies should make optimum credit policy. So what is the optimum credit policy? To see that they maximize the operating profit and reduce the incremental cost. So the amount of accounts receivable depends on a volume of credit sales and collection period credit policy. It determines the volume of credit sales, credit period, credit standards, terms and collection efforts. So the amount of credit receivables, it will depend on the volume of credit sales and the credit period. Now the credit policy determines the volume of credit sales. So through the credit policy, we can determine what is the volume of credit sales. So whenever you are selling on credit, it is mainly because of the credit policy of the company. Then the credit period, credit standard, terms and conditions. So all this will be mentioned in the credit policy of the company. Now next, all customers may not pay during the credit period. Hence, companies make efforts to accelerate the collection in order to reduce bad debt losses. Companies, in addition, monitor receivables based on the average collection period and aging schedules. When companies fail to collect the receivables, sell such receivables to a specialized firms. Now, account receivables, they become a major part of the current assets of the company. Now, how do we just collect the accounts receivable? So, whatever credit we have paid for the customers, it should be returned by the customers within the time period. So, the company should make efforts to see that all the dues which are due to the company, it should come on time. In addition, the company should monitor receivables based on the average collection period. So, the company has to see that whatever the money it has lent, it should come back within the period. And when companies fail to collect the receivables, they sell such receivables to specialized firms. So, in case there is any bad debts or in case we feel that the debtor will turn bad, then such receivables will be sold to a specialized firm. So, this practice is called as factoring. Factors or companies involved in factoring advance cash against receivables to solve the problem of shortage of cash for a certain rate of commission. So, when the company feels that some of the debtors may turn bad, it may sell those debtors to another company or to an agency who will be engaged in collecting such bad debts, and this practice we call it as the factoring. And the factors or companies involved in factoring, so they will pay the cash in advance to these companies and solve the problem of shortage of cash for a rate of commission. So they will be charging a commission rate for their services. Then next part of the working capital management is inventory management. Inventories constitute raw materials, work in progress and finished goods. So inventories constitute more than 60% of the current assets. So the efficient inventory management is essential in order to operate the production process uninterruptedly, to guard the production process against the risks involved in the supply of raw materials and in the price fluctuations of raw materials. So, it is necessary for the company to maintain an adequate supply of raw materials. So, if there is no supply of raw materials, then the production process has to stop. And at the same time, the cost of inventory should be minimized to the greatest extent possible in order to contribute to the low cost of production. So, we should also say that the minimum amount should be invested in the stock of the materials, because if we hold huge stock, then that will increase the cost of production. Then, next, there are two conflicting objectives of inventory management. A production manager prefers less quantity of inventory in order to reduce the cost of inventory, whereas the marketing manager prefers larger quantity of inventory in order to have uninterrupted supply of finished products. The finance manager balances these conflicting objectives of inventory management. Now, when we are thinking about the inventory management, there are two conflicting aspects. So, the production manager, he wants a limited inventory, whereas the marketing manager, he wants a high inventory. So, why this production manager wants a limited inventory? He wants to bring down the cost of production, whereas the marketing manager wants to have a high level of inventory so that he can have more sales of goods. There is an uninterrupted sale of goods as per the demand. So, to offset both, we have the finance manager who will be having this, who will offset this. So, conflicting objectives of he will balance the conflicting objectives of both the production manager and the marketing manager. Therefore, efficient inventory management should ensure continuous supply of raw materials to facilitate uninterrupted production. So, when we are having inventory management, see to it that we have uninterrupted supply of raw materials to the production house, then maintain sufficient quantity of raw materials in terms of short supply and anticipate price changes. So, whenever there is shortage in the supply of raw materials, we have to ensure that there is adequate stock of the raw materials. And then next one is maintain finished goods of sufficient quantity for continuous sales operation and efficient customer service. So, we have to ensure that there is sufficient quantity of goods for sales. And next one is try to minimize the carry cost and time. And lastly, control investment in inventories and keep it at an optimum level. See that there is not much funds locked up in the inventory. Next, let us look into what do we mean by production strategy. Production strategies are broad long-term action plans. They are made for achieving the main objectives of organization. They tell us what the production department must do to achieve the top aims of the organization. It provides a roadmap for the production department. So, the production department is one of the main departments of the company, and it will tell us what is the roadmap of the company. So, they are long-term action plans of the organization for production of goods and services. Then, production strategies decide about the investment to be made for the production, the technology to be used for the production, the training to be given for the production staff, the production schedule to be followed, etc. So, when we are deciding about the production strategies, there are certain things to be kept in mind. First one is the investment to be made. What is the investment to be made for the production? Second one is the technology. Third one, what is the kind of training to be given for the production staff? And lastly, the production schedule to be followed. So, based on all this, we have to finalize the production technology strategy. It also decides about the goods and services to be produced and when to introduce them in the market. So, what kind of goods and services are to be produced and what is the right time to introduce in the market? So, all this will comprise of the production strategy. Then next, it is the top level of management that first fixes the main objectives of the organization. Then top level managers make strategies for achieving these objectives. So, it is the work of the top level management to set the objectives for the entire organization, and based on these objectives, the middle level managers, they will be making their own strategies. So, generally, there are two types of strategies, that is, business strategies are strategies made for the entire organization. It covers all departments and they are made by the top level management. Then, next one is the functional or the departmental strategies. They are made for a particular department and each department has its own strategies such as production and marketing, and they support the business strategy to achieve the main objectives of the organization. So, each department will have its own strategy in support of the main objective of the entire organization, and these are strategies made by the middle level management, that is the departmental heads. So the production strategy is a functional strategy. So we should understand that production strategy comprises of both business level and the functional level. The next one is the logistics strategy. Strategic plan is a framework or series of guideposts that keeps an operating plan on the right path to meet the objectives. So strategy is a path which we have found for the company to see that we meet the objectives of the company. It defines who you are, where you want to be, and how you will get there while addressing the stakeholders' concerns and expectations. So a comprehensive logistics strategy should encompass strategic, operational, and tactical levels of logistical planning, as well as the 4 main pain points in the supply chain, including the facility locations, customer service levels, inventory, and transportation decision making. So whenever we are making a logistics strategy, we have to keep 4 points in mind. The first one is the supply chain. What is the supply chain we are having? Second one is the facility locations. Where do we intend to keep our stock of goods? Then customer service levels. So what is the level of customer service? And lastly, the inventory and the transportation decision making. So based on all this, we formulate the logistic strategy. Then the primary objective of any logistic strategy is to deliver the right products to the right customers at the right time and at the least possible cost. So we should ensure that the product reaches the hands of the customer with the least cost. An effective logistic strategy can help your company minimize the investments and other costs by defining the service levels at which your organization is most cost effective. So an effective logistic strategy can help your company minimize the cost. So we can as well minimize the cost by defining the service levels to which the organization is most cost effective. Then when you try to see that you are delivering the goods at a very low cost, your company benefits from cost efficiency and your customers get what they need when they need it, boosting the customer satisfaction. So if you can make the goods available to the customer at the right time and at the right place, then you will be giving customer satisfaction. A satisfied customer will be a brand ambassador for the company. Then, in a changing environment, logistic planning minimizes risk by enabling companies to anticipate and develop strategies to adapt to those changes. So, whenever we know that the business environment keeps on changing, and as such, the company have to adapt themselves to the changes in the environment. The supply chains are always in a state of flux as many companies develop logistic strategies for specific product lines, geographic regions, or customer segments, enabling them to adapt to the market changes impacting one region or business line while maintaining efficiency across the others. So, the supply chain, we should always see that they are always in a state of flux. That is, they should be always running. So, many companies develop logistic strategies for specific product lines. For specific product lines, they have a logistic strategy, or it may be a strategy based for a geographical region or customer segment. So when they have all these separate logistic strategy for each of this, we can say that they can have a cost-effective logistic strategy. Then the 3 main aspects of logistic strategic planning include long-term goals and the means and process for achieving those goals. Now, what are the long-term goals? Long-term goals include customer satisfaction, company's competitive advantage, and supply chain management. So, when we have the long-term goal, it will comprise of the customer satisfaction, the company's competitive advantage, and the supply chain management. Then, what is the means for achieving long-term goal? It includes delivering value and customer service. You see that you are delivering the value to the customer and you are also delivering service to the customer. So, when you keep your customer happy, then automatically they will keep the company happy. So, the process for achieving your company's long-term goals include how you will execute your logistical strategy, as well as anticipating and managing change and relating each element of your logistics strategy to the company's overarching business objectives. So, the process for achieving your company's long-term goals include how you will execute your logistics strategy. So, what is the way in you are executing, as well as anticipating and managing the change. So, what are the changes you anticipate and how do you manage those changes? And based on all this, we will be able to meet the company's overarching strategy. Then, the logistic tips below cover everything from unified supply chains to automated collaboration, integration, and beyond. So, we have this logistic tips to be learned here. So, in this, first one is planning tips to unify supply chains. You see that you unify the supply chains, whatever are available for the company. Second one is logistic strategies for streamlined fulfillment. Third one is integrated automated collaboration. Next one is logistic personnel and supplier management pointers. And lastly, tips for improving customer experience. So, these are the various tips for logistic strategy. Hope you have all followed this. Thank you.